This one is going to be a fun one because we've been doing a lot of looking backwards today. And the brief that was given to us for this closing session was actually to really do what I consider some stargazing. And as I was chatting with my colleagues and kind of thinking, well, how do we want to frame this? I started with this mantra in my head, you know, imagine what the world's going to look like in 2050. And that's kind of what's shaped our talking today, because obviously today's entire event got prompted by thinking about, you know, Google's 25th anniversary. Search has been around for 30 years. So you start thinking, well, man, what's it going to look like in another 30 years? So as we prepared, I started thinking, well, what will it look like in 2050-ish? And what did it look like, you know, 30 odd years ago? And I have a very, very brief clip. It's like Mark and I must have been joined at the brain, because I was like, oh, I want to show a clip as well today. So I'm just going to get folks to pull this up. And maybe some of you will have seen this one. Tell me if you recognize this.
Got him in the Foxhole, 4421 Gainsborough.
Send a DCPD blue and white. Set up a perimeter until we're en route.
Investigator from the feds here.
Yeah, I don't need some twink from the Fed poking around right now.
John, I wrote it down on your calendar. I left you a message at your house.
Check in with the papers ahead of forwarded. See if the neighbors knew where they went. Check all relations.
Checking neighbors and relations.
But John.
Fletch, just get him some coffee. Tell him some...
Okay. Play the rest. Yeah, that's the panel. We're just going to play this movie. It is actually great. It holds up quite well. Starting out as, you know, in my first teaching role in information science, it was, you know, 2002. I'd been on the job just a couple of years. That's when this movie came out. And it's set in 2054. So Sherrod gets a gold star. 2054. Search doesn't quite look like that yet today. Is it going to look like that in 30 years? We're going to have to wait and see. But I'm quite excited by today's conversation because it clearly shows that at the end of the day, technology is always evolving, our engagement with it is evolving, and what we're able to then do for people, do for society, for our communities is also going to be continuing to evolve. Whether or not we go down completely the Minority Report line is yet to be seen. But if you have not seen that movie, it is worth dialing up and having a look. So what we want to do today is talk through a variety of issues, and I've asked each of my colleagues here to think about particular imaginings that they might have moving forward. We're going to try to make our conversation as interactive as possible so that you can kind of hear from everybody on a few different topics, and we'll aim to leave some time for you to ask us some questions as well. I'll do a very, very brief introduction, but you've also got bios at the ready because you can Google us at any time. So on my left, I've got Peter Bailey, who leads machine learning for search and recommendations at Canva, and Professor Jason Potts, who's a distinguished professor of economics here at RMIT University in Blockchain Innovation Hub and a chief investigator of the ARC Center of Excellence, ADM+S. On my right, I have Dr. Johanne Trippas, a Vice Chancellor's Research Fellow at RMIT, who specializes in intelligent systems, and Associate Professor Guido Zuccon from the University of Queensland, where he leads the Information Engineering Lab. All right. Ready to rock and roll. So I am going to kick us off with a question that I want to pose to Jason. So get ready for this. Where and how do people actually look for information in this imagined 2050 state? Is Google still going? How do people actually share information with other people? What are we doing if we look forward to 2050?
That's what the economy is made of, is double-sided search. I'm looking for something, something is looking for me, a market mechanism or a broker or something intermediates that search, creates value. And there's two sets of information that are doing that sort of intermediation. So I think search has, I mean, economists don't think of it, you know, we didn't invent search, we study the process of humans doing search. But market algorithms are a great example of one of the first digitizations of search in sort of trading algorithms. But this goes to the answer to my question is push that further, right? So in the future, what do humans do? We stop using our little human voices and our little human brains, and we have robots that are agents that sort of know my preferences. They have access to my bank accounts. They have my resources and wealth. They know what I want to do. They're not going out searching for information. They're going out finding people to interact with and trade. And those other people are also not people. They're people that are represented by their robots, their agents, their their apps, whatever it is at that stage. But what's different there is the human is using a digital agent, that's one side of the search engine, to find another human represented by another digital agent using another side of a search engine. And that sort of that sort of platform, whatever that platform is what we will think of as search. But the word for that today is economy. That's the economy, is that sort of that process. And I think, so I was sort of super excited to be on this panel because I wanted to make that point, that I think search isn't just information and a computer science problem and a library or information retrieval problem. That's where the technology got figured out and optimized. But the real value of the search is search and match. And search and match will be increasingly intermediated because it can, right? Just because it can, by sort of our bots, whatever our human agents are. I don't know what they'll be, but it's unlikely there'll be other humans. The previous, the 2,000 years previous to this was my search and match agents were other human beings, specialized human beings that had specialist knowledge. In the future, it'll be amazing because I don't have to rely on slow, cantankerous, expensive humans. I can just have my bots do that. But the thing is, that's what search and I think this will look like is some of that will be information retrieval for knowledge and where's my copy or where can I find a thing. But most of it will be finding other agents to cooperate with to create value. So I think that's the sort of quadrillion, bazillion sort of next phase of this.
Interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. My vision is much more short-sighted than Jason's. But I have some thoughts that are in line with what Jason said, right? So we will not be searching in the way we are searching now. We will not be searching for documents as we do now. We will get information instead. And we're already getting these, with information cards at the moment, with short answers, and these large language models are really now showing us that they can deliver much more than this little snippet of information that can deliver an information, a conversation with information. I feel we will not be searching for information. There will be the agent that will give us the information, will know when we need information. And it's not just information in the way we think about today in terms of what we index in a search engine now, but it will be all type of services that the agent can get access to. So imagine it can query and interact with the APIs to perform tasks for us and give us back, think back as Chirag example, give us back a complete plan for our next holiday in Melbourne. And so we will see that these already this move towards a zero-shot queries, not having to enter a query, but the search engine to give us immediately an answer proactively, that we start seeing now, that will be really the mainstream way for us to get information. And so the problem with this is that we will not be interacting with the information source, right? We get that information. And so it will be the agent that mediates our access to information. And therefore, there will be a big question on who is controlling that agent, who has created that agent, what governance mechanisms are there, and something that we have heard throughout the day.
Do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Yeah, I think super interesting perspectives. I tend to be very, I think, even more short-sighted than Guido. Sorry, I'm very prosaic in these matters. Like, I think predicting the future is incredibly hard, both for 25 years in the future, but also just predicting immediately the next thing. I've had the luck in my career to work on a few prediction problems at Microsoft, even predicting the next 2 words I'm about to type, given I've typed 3 words already in the sentence, turns out to be really hard. Actually, the modeling is super tricky, even with really good language models. Your probabilities of guessing it right are about 1 in 10. Because people are just bizarrely varied in what they say and how they express themselves, and their ability to even understand what they don't know is often very like extreme. Like, we don't know until we start the process of the interaction with the information what we need to know. So I think those things that kind of run up against the challenge, and why it's really fun. Like, something we say at Canva is search is life, which is actually I cribbed from Dave Hawking, but it's funny because it's a pun, so it works well with Dave, but it's also a kind of like, this stuff just is really, really hard. You know, again, kind of blunt stats are even things like Google, like really like our best web search engine technologies are out there. You know, success rates on the page about 1 in 2. So like 1 in 2 searches, you type something and we didn't get anything right for you. Now, was that because we did get right stuff, you didn't express yourself enough? Or is it because it's just a really hard problem when you're talking about the world's information? So yeah, I feel like we'll still be struggling in another 25 years to try and build really good recommendations and search systems, sadly.
Well, and I'd like to take that a little bit in a different direction. Like, I'm thinking, okay, where will we have search? Like, you know, we're gonna have self-driving cars, I hope, by 2050, because I'd love that. I think it would be awesome. Are we still with our phones going, oh, hang on, let me put in a query? I hope not, right? Like, I hope these systems will be a bit more user-friendly and will, what Peter said, know and understand what we need at a certain time. So I think sometimes we need to not just think about, okay, where will search be, but also in what context are we using this? The rest of the world has evolved too. Where are we with the rest of the world? How does search sit in that? So I think I always like to think about self-driving cars, and just how that might match with our surroundings, what else we will have that has evolved, and how that actually fits in that daily life.
Fantastic. So this is a starting point for us. And I mean, if I was going to predict into the future, I often look to the past. And one of the things that we definitely know, we've got lots of research on, is around, you know, the human interaction component of search. And so it's not all about a topic that you chug into Google and you get a response. We know that people actually want to engage with that person, and that's often why they seek out people. So whatever this mythical agent might look like, or how it might function, it's going to actually have to not just replicate the things we want, but the way that we want them and that human interaction. So I'm thinking like AI replica, you know, sex robots, never mind. So on to our next one then, and this one I'm going to get Peter to start off with, and it goes back to something Johanna was just saying. You know, what is one system going to rule everything in 2050? Which could partly be a capitalism question, but we don't have to necessarily go there. But are we going to still have tons of apps? Are we going to still have a phone that we go to? Is that going to be how it is? And who's going to own that? Is somebody going to own that? Are we going to own it collectively?
Two as well, that's better. Thank you. I think Sue said at the start, web search is not search. Google is very dominant in search, but it's not the only worldwide web search engine on the planet. Though, we have Bing, which I had the luck to work on over several years, as do some other people in this audience. But the number of worldwide web search engines are actually smaller than the number of countries that have managed to do wide-bodied aeroplanes. It turns out it's a staggeringly hard problem to do this really well at scale, and it is one of the biggest, profit-making machines on the planet. If you can connect people to their needs, and the people who would like to service those needs through search ads, and that's what basically funds the economy of search engines. But patent discovery lawyers and search engineers are about the only two groups of people I know who wake up in the morning going, I'm really looking forward to doing some searching today. This is going to be what's going to make my day. Everyone else that's not what they think. They're doing tasks like Sue and Chirag talked about. That's what what we do in our life. We don't go out to search. We go to do things. And there's lots of places that have, existed in the economy to support those tasks that we're really interested in. Many of them are online these days, and some are fully digital, but all of them kind of tie up a lot of data. And so those places that are incredibly valuable for you to spend your time in, they end up owning a lot of that information. So Amazon owns a lot of information about how I shop, and Netflix owns a lot of information about how I watch television, and Spotify owns a lot of information about how I consume podcasts and music, and Google and Microsoft own a lot of information about how I search and navigate the world and have information resources. Apple owns a bunch of other random bits of information about me, and they've been very careful to silo all of this information off from each other on the phone. And it just seems very hard to understand how suddenly all of that information is all going to be shared in one big product. Like, who would we trust with that amount of information? I actually think one of the reasons that we do distribute our collective data very carefully, and are quite happy that different companies don't have all the information, is because we actually worry about data sharing. And that's one of the reasons I asked the question of Sue earlier. It's like, where does this look like? Is it actually ever going to be possible to put it all in one place? The best place is maybe some incredibly tightly controlled thing that I have access to all that data that I shared with these other systems, and I can somehow selectively push it out to others. But I think, again, this is a really hard thing. Like, I have multiple personas as well. I have a work persona. I have a friends in the IR community persona. I have personal friends. I have families. And all of those things have different selective amounts of information that I share quite deliberately or, carefully. And it turned out that it was not the case that everyone would share everything all the time with everyone. That isn't how the world works in the way that humans interact. So I think we're actually going to look, if anything, more fragmented than we already are. I think there will be more and more niche apps that come up, and sadly, search is unevenly distributed, and I think it's going to go on being unevenly distributed. The really successful companies will be able to afford to put together great search systems, and many of the other ones won't. They'll have good enough, because lots of times good enough is okay, and it's only a few places where we'll really need amazing search. So yeah, that's my take.
Don't tell Elon Musk, because that's what he wants, is the singular app to
It's
control
never happening.
everything. I know, because you're human. I love it. Distributed model of the self. Who wants to weigh in on this one?
Yeah. Maybe I attach myself to the last point Peter has said, that is, running now a search product with the new technology we are seeing is becoming more and more challenging, more and more expensive. You need large data center, you need a lot of computation, and these models are only becoming bigger by the day, right? It seems a game of who has the biggest language model, right? So that will certainly, the risk associated to that is reduction of new players in the game, right? And so I don't see these, I don't see it all negative at the moment, or all black, in the sense that the research community has come up with ways to try to open source some of these models, and ways to, and are exploring ways to make this model more computation efficient. And so, that could be operated by, let's say, smaller players, but it's certainly a big challenge that we will be faced in the future if we want to see more concurrence, more players getting into the different market or application areas.
Jason?
Yeah, I've got some views on this. I can't tell whether I'm furiously agreeing or furiously disagreeing, so I'm just going to say it in some different words. We'll see whether it makes sense. But I'm super optimistic about the market future. I think if we can get there. What I'm worried about is, I blame Nick Bostrom. Whereas viewing this through the lens of natural monopoly, just single, enormous search engine, the great one to rule it all. That's a horrific, right? It's truly horrible. Whether it's publicly owned, government-owned, monopoly, whatever. Very, very bad outcome for all the reasons. Some of which are around privacy, some of which are around control, some of which are around bad actors, whether it's us or government or whatever. I don't care, just monopoly bad. But that's not That's not what's happening. Are we? Okay, good. All right, I was being censored there a little bit, but that's not what it looks like to me right now. What it looks like to me is phenomenal contestability in search space, where a new company seems to appear every 3 weeks, even though you've got these phenomenal scale economies in search optimization at the same time. You know, given that technical fact, the market fact seems to belie that. And the fact that lots of new companies are coming in, lots of new venture capital is providing it, lots of new teams are breaking away and starting their own thing. It looks, you know, it looks like that's exactly what capitalism is meant to be doing, is creating this contestability in that space. Now, the fact that it's chaotic and messy and everyone's angry about all of it all the time, that's normal, right? I think that's what this sort of looks like. And the Boeing example or the Airbus example is an interesting counterpoint, because the reason it looks like those global monopolies is because of the enormous regulation on the construction of wide-body aircraft. There's only really 2 companies that can actually comply with that sort of horrific set of things, whereas the great virtue of search right now is it's basically free for all, and that's producing this enormous explosion of every position is being contested away within weeks, and everyone's scared. We're scared of whatever the current seeming monopolist is, but just wait a month, there'll be a new one, and like that sort of process of sequential contestable seeming monopolies. The other name for that is competition. And so I'm sort of very optimistic about what this looks like. What I'm worried about is we mess with that, and we try and sort of go, okay, we don't like them, but we want that one, so let's just make that one the one that we have, and then we'll try and make them behave in a way that's, whatever. That's what we did with the airlines, and what we got was basically zero innovation for decades. It was a disaster. That's what we did with space launch travel. And we got basically very expensive space launches that never changed for decades. Like, this is an opportunity to take a frontier technology that everyone uses all the time and not screw it up by, even though there are just obvious natural monopolies and there's obvious reasons that big is better, but it just doesn't seem that doesn't seem to be that's not the thing I'm worried about right now.
Interesting. So, Johanna, I'm going to get you to move on in our thinking, because you mentioned a minute ago, you hope that we're not just going to be typing little things into our little handheld devices, as wedded to them as we are. So what does come next? Are we ever going to get a Minority Report where I can just do things, lying down in bed and I've got a screen above me, or, walking down the street? What's it going to look like from that perspective?
Well, I hope so.
Okay, cool.
I want to get away from our screens. If we look into the past, and I think we've heard about that quite a bit, but if we look back for a moment and we think about how we used to search, and we would go to the libraries in Sheffield and we send in our queries. But when we had the opportunity to interact with these librarians, we had a personal experience. We had a conversation with these librarians. They could help us narrow down what we were searching for. So it's really an assistant in what we were trying to solve, that information need that we have. And sometimes we didn't even know how to formulate that information need. And now these people could help us with this. So now comes along the web, and we've got amazing search engines, and they do a really good job. If you think about it, 24/7, it's at our fingertips. It's very scalable, so we've got suddenly access to not just one library, but to many different libraries all over the world. And so if we think about these good things and the interesting things, and we put them all together, then maybe we finally come to something that is scalable, is accessible. More people might have access to it as well. And I'd like to think about keeping the user central. And so I don't want to interact with a computer screen, a touch screen. I don't care about that. I want the information for the task that I've got at hand. And I like to think about how we can interact with information in a mixed reality world. And let's say that I've got a question about my bike. I've got a new bike, and I've got tubeless tires, and suddenly I need to do something about this. So instead of me going now to my bike shop and say, all right, what do I do? I can now take my bike, go in my world, and actually have someone come to me and say, all right, yeah, do this or do that. And I can do that on the fly with them. A system that actually comes and helps me for that particular task. Now, for a different task, for example, I gave the example yesterday as well, like I've got bugs on my plants, I need to solve this, and I need to get some vinegar out of my cupboard and some soap and mix it together and spray on it. But it's good that now someone else, my personal gardener, can actually come and help me with that. And so it's that virtual reality. It's like trying to make things invisible. So technology is just a tool for us to get to something. It shouldn't be our aim. And so I really hope that technology is going to disappear, that really takes a background, that we don't need to take out our phones to take, oh, cool, I'll take a selfie with all of you, yeah. No, it's actually already taken for me. And that will have all the advantages of technology that is actually useful for us.
What do we think about this vision?
Okay, I go. Yeah, so I think we will be moving more and more towards what Sue and Chirag as well mentioned today, right? Trying to shorten the distance between our physical world and our digital world, right? We will have our digital world will be embedded into the physical world through new devices. You know, think augmented reality, think Google Glasses at some point that will be re-put there, or things like that, right? And we will be able to receive information in a proactive way, right? Again, to my point at the start of the panel, we will not be asked for information. We receive the information that the agent knows that we need. Peter before said the searcher doesn't know what they need to search. Don't worry, in 2050 the AI will tell you what you need to know.
Ooh, that's scary.
Very.
Very.
I was going to just make a few just remarks on that. So I think the sort of interface with digital is clear. That's definitely going to be a frontier. The other one that's interesting is communities, or just small groups of people. So one of the sort of great search technologies that and examples of artificial superintelligence that we've had for a few hundred years is a corporation, which is a group of people that come together and can share tacit knowledge quite easily. Like it's a group of, if you're part of the group, you have high trust, you can sort of search and find information about the resources and capabilities. Everyone's experience with universities aside on that, but we already have these sort of social clusters of spaces that are sort of easier to search than others, and we sort of think of search engine technology as a kind of way to sort of reach over that and just to search broadly in the public. But the other sort of frontier is making our own sort of social groups or community groups, or just whatever it is, a group with a purpose that has a high amount of sort of tacit understanding about the goals and the resources that they have, just to make that work so much better. And I mean, why that's interesting is that the other thing that group does is it generates a huge amount of information that's not individual, it's information about the capabilities of the group. And that kind of sort of search and discovery of what else could we do, what could this group do. So I think enhancing small groups is the other sort of frontier of what this set of capabilities can do.
Okay, on that note, small groups, I want to move to Guido, and I'm going to ask a question about work, because one of the prompting questions for us today was really what comes next beyond ChatGPT. But what I'm seeing in the immediate future are a lot of workplaces already starting to integrate ChatGPT, which is probably not a good idea, but never mind. What is that going to look like next? What's the future of work? Are we really going to be sitting in these kinds of spaces, sitting at a desk, forced to come into an office? Where's that landscape going to take us?
Yeah, okay. I want to take two of the things you said and try to elaborate a bit more, right? You say ChatGPT, so large language model. You say work, so professional tasks, right? So you're right. We are seeing more and more large language model being used in professional tasks, but I think that there is the promise that these trend will grow. But I think there are a lot of challenges, barriers that need to be overcome for that to actually prove the promise that we have been given now that would be useful, right? And so, we heard many of them today from Sue and Chirag. I just wanted to touch upon a few and try to elaborate a bit. We heard about hallucination and incorrect information, and I think Sue mentioned retrieval augmentation as being one way to overcome that. And as good as it sounds, because I'm an IARA expert and this sounds great, yes, give me money, so I do retrieval augmented language model. I don't believe retrieval augmentation is the right way to address hallucinations. For a number of reasons. We already have tried that, and we see that we are incapable at the moment to control the tension that there is between the information we give in the retrieval augmentations, in that information we pass to the model, and what the model already knows about the reality. So that mediation is very hard to control. In professional setting, one thing that is really key is model compliance, right? And we don't have mechanism at the moment to guarantee that the model is compliant to a set of rules or a set of properties or characteristics that our professional setting enforces us. It's not just correctness. It might be attainment to a policy. It might be the language that is used and so on. We talk about provenance and attribution in the previous talks. Reward models. How are these? How are technology based on this large language model going to actually reward the content creator? And I actually like a lot one point that Chirag touched upon very briefly, that was biases, right? And here is not the biases of the model that I'm worried about, but it's more the biases of us users in a workforce setting when we are using these tools, how these tools are helping us overcoming some of our biases, or maybe instead that reinforces biases that we have. So I think these are big barriers or challenges that we need to overcome for really reap the benefits of the technology we are seeing at the moment.
Critical. Yeah. Love to jump in. Go for it, Peter.
Yeah, great comments, Guido. In terms of the work thing, I'm sort of mindful of Ryan White's beliefs and biases from a decade ago, where again, we absolutely know that people will be biased in what they come to any particular thing and choose stuff that helps often reinforce their bias rather than be open to new ideas. I guess I'm a little bit bullish on what's opened up with large-scale language models and this ability to do some what used to be quite complex synthesis tasks for information workers. So I'm going to kind of narrowly scope it to this area where they're really good at dealing with text, and I'm sure they're going to work really well with multimodal systems as well. So like images we already see, and videos I think are the next place on that space. So much stuff these days is through video. I was thinking about like, Johanne, yours, what do I do to get the bug spray working? Well, it's like, well, there's probably an awesome YouTube video that's, they've already extracted the key moments from automatically for you to just, here you go, just go and look at this stuff. This is what you need to do. And there, a lot of what we try and do with search and sort of task completion through systems is to make people more efficient, to lift up the level of abstraction that they're working on, to let them spend more time doing the sort of, the yum, and the computers do the yuck. So like in e-discovery, if you have 100,000 documents that have to be, scanned to see the smoking gun in the evidence for the law case, you can pay a small army of junior lawyers to go and do that, or maybe you can get a large-scale language model and some search stuff to work over the top of that, and it'll do it really quickly and efficiently. And it'll have some failings, like, this is not to say that it won't it'll be perfect, but then humans aren't perfect either, as we know from relevance assessment work, that humans can barely agree on what's relevant half the time. In fact, you're doing really well if you get them to agree half the time. So yeah, so I feel like those types of technologies are kind of exciting about how in the workforce in particularly information knowledge worker spaces, we're going to see a lot of efficiencies, and new things that used to be really hard now go like, oh cool, this was like, who realized that we used to spend 2 weeks putting together this summary of the 1,000-page IPCC report for the minister, which needed to be done in a day's time. That's actually a hard problem to solve without technology. So yeah, I'm bullish.
Can I make some predictions here then? So, what this points to is the end of specialization and the beginning of hyper-specialization. So if I can just pull up some queries, how do I do this, blah, 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 blah. What that looks like is, instead of me and a few other people forming a company that has a bunch of specialists doing blah, I can do it all myself, except that's illegal because licensing, and I'm not allowed to do my own electrical wiring, but I can figure out how to do it. So there's regulatory barriers stopping me doing that. But what that points toward is a very clear prediction that firms get smaller. We don't need as many big firms, which therefore means we don't need as many bosses. So people don't work for a company and a boss as much. They just do a lot more stuff on their own because they can, right? And you pull in the knowledge from the digital expertise that's pulled in. The only thing standing in the way of that is the law at the moment. But that prediction then, big companies shrink into lots more small, and again, that kind of, we've been here before. This is the Middle Ages. This was the sort of wandering experts that would just travel around and do stuff. So lots more people working for themselves, them and their machine, figuring out how to do stuff. So everyone's their own. A lot more people are their own bosses in this universe, and that's a good thing, right? But what it also predicts then is, well, why stop there? Take that, you can roll that forward and go into hyper-specialization. I'm just going to do this, specialize in this, and I'm going to use my machines to help me with all the other things. And what that looks like is, that's a world with a lot fewer large corporations and all of the problems and benefits that you lose from that. This has huge implications for the tax system. This has huge implications for labor law, and a lot of our political institutions that are built around the idea that the economy is made of a small number of large organizations that more or less employ everyone, and except for those that don't. So I think the future of work is an interesting question, but the future of organizations, I think, is the more interesting question.
Which almost leads to, like, what's the future of humanity and society and community and...
So deep.
Well, isn't it? This is the point where we're almost ready to go to the pub, you see?
I know.
And so, but I think it's critical, because if those predictions were to come true, I think the next step becomes, what else do we need to disrupt, right? Capitalism, social structures, so, okay, well, if regulations and laws don't work for certain things, who's to say those will still be there? And also, is that just within Australia? Is that global? How we're already struggling across borders with things like copyright law and IP, right? Very, very interesting. I'm wanting to save some time to turn it over to the audience. I just wanted to comment on the fact that, okay, how many of you have seen Minority Report? Quite a number of you, because we haven't quite approached in these predictions and comments that level of change and search. And it occurred to me as I was listening that maybe we're asking the wrong question. In that movie, it's really about not search, it's about being. So as he walks past billboards, they change and respond to him. They know he's there, and it's all very personalized. So as we walk down the street, we're seeing different ads. So I don't have to search for that. I just have to be, right? And the premise of the point of why he's searching is trying to track down people who are thinking of committing crimes, which again is amazing, right? I don't have to search for things. I can just think about them, and some other reality will come and happen to me. We're already living in a space where people are starting to put, RFID chips into their bodies. We're not talking today about cyborgs. I think there's a whole other conversation that we can have, but it probably needs to be fueled by a beer or two. On this note, we are 4:20, so we do have about 10-ish minutes if we're sticking to time, or even longer, depending on how active you want to be today. So we've got our roving microphones coming around. Look at all these hands in the air. I love it. I love it. We may never get out of here. That's a good thing. Oh, nope. I think... Can we do DoorDash for viewers?
Yes, it's working.
Yay. Okay.
Yep. Okay. My question is that nobody seems to have addressed that in 2050, the world is going to be a boiling cauldron, and there's going to be the thing that we were going to be searching for is shelter that's and food and a safe place to be in an extremely hostile environment with mass migration from climate refugees, lots of civil unrest and so on. How will we experience search in that environment?
Great question, especially now that we know that ChatGPT and other systems are very resource intensive and contributing to climate change.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, let's hope not, obviously. And I don't know how we will be searching in that world. But I think your point, highlights how important is work on efficiency, right? And, from our CIR community perspective, somebody said, who was it? I think was said that there were 3 sessions about efficiency when it was Alistair. There were 3 sessions about efficiency. Of course, it was Alistair. In 1998, and now that has disappeared, right? I really think that as a community, we need to get back to that, right? We need to go back to understand how we can make these things more cheaper to run, right? Cheaper, not meaning less energy or more energy efficient, right? So yeah, that's a big challenge that we have as a community in front of us.
Also, I fully agree of the enormous concern and worry around climate change, Alessandra. So definitely empathize with that. I also think that it's very lucky that we've been inventing a sort of planetary scale communication information searching facility, because I think there are enormous problems that we're going to be tackling. The ability to share what those are, to find out what the latest advances, whatever they may be, to help us in those circumstances. I think that'll be a much better place than not having great search to share those things. So trying to be optimistic. Yay that we invented this in time. Maybe sad that social media just distracted us all for so long from the main game, unfortunately.
But I think it also goes back to my comment about being and thinking in our environment. It immediately strikes me that we also don't think about things beyond computer search and text search, right? Indigenous ways of knowing. So I think about indigenous land management and the things that we should be doing in order to combat wildfires, bushfires here in a country like Australia, but also Canada, has been suffering this year. Greece, like I could go on. And that is purely oral tradition and sharing of knowledge in very, very different ways that have nothing to do with computing. And so how do we actually get back to that and embrace these, different ways of being? We have to look outside our Western experiences as well. But that's a whole, how do we do that? That's a topic for next year's symposium, or maybe next month. We don't have a year to wait. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Flora from UNSW. So I really like your illustration about Minority Report, and to take it even and push it even further. In a world where we are sensed, how many of you here are wearing smartwatches? Okay, great. And in the upcoming new technology, even with the airports, you've got EEG sensing there. So it's not just about what you can consume online, but as you actually move around the city, intent can be easily understood. So it's not just search intent, but intent as you traverse the world. We call it cyber physical. Social world is actually work with my colleague there only. When I was still at RMIT with Mark as well, we had this project with Westfield Mall where actually we were in the room with the mall managers to actually talk about that same scenario. As we walk around, the displays of the ads will be able to portray it as you walk, because we could actually track exactly what people are looking for in that mall based on their movement and their demography and all of those things. But it will be even more intense, and I think some of our profiles, very deep profiles, will be known by people, maybe some of these companies who are actually having a lot of this wearable tech, and having not just wearable but also understanding of our wall guided behavior, which is the app usage behaviors, not just things that are happening in a public web, but those in the app, all kind of apps on a mobile. So that'll be one. And the second thing, I agree what Sandra mentioned about 2050. Climate change is upon us, and that's true. I think we really have to think about that. And I think thinking about my kids, for example, this new generation is actually just interacting with devices completely different way with ours. So I think maybe if we want to ask this question, we should get use a study with this new generation rather than ask the oldies. So that's just my comment.
Thank you for those comments. And yeah, I mean, I'm always struck that affordance theory is still alive and well, and yet, a lot of it is about intentional design and not looking at multiple affordance. And going back to your first comment, also in terms of bad actors, I think a lot about that, and I know like Dana, is always talking about this, particularly around air tags and different technologies in that way. And so as much as we do innovate in these kind of holistic wearables, etc., it also opens the door for, inappropriate things to be happening. So we've got to be tackling biases and potential uses and things that we may not afford when we design in terms of what actual use might look like. Cool. I think we have time for at least one more. We'll see how we go. Probably a couple
Thanks
more.
very much for the very interesting panel, and very I'm passionate about the future of the search, and also enjoying the other sessions today. Well, I remember, Mark, you mentioned in previous panel about diversity of needs, user needs, and also Shurag in his talk about the case study of accessibility for design for people with disabilities. Because I have done a lot about the information behavior of marginalized communities. So I'm very interested to say, what's a search and a search products, search platforms to design for, like people from CORD backgrounds, culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and elderly people, or, like children. Like my two boys, they are in primary school 7 and 10. They actually cannot use, they should not use ChatGPT, but they now get to use ChatGPT because they are terribly smart. They are too smart to try to pretend they are over 12, because you cannot use it until you are 12. They just pretend, they change the age to 12, they pass the test of search. Now they can use search too, ChatGPT. They use Spotify for music and Bilibili for movie. So for the children, of course, for parents, we are very about the search and safety, security they use. So my question is for the future, how we can, for that perspective, direction about search or search products, search platforms for people with multiple needs, the diversity of user needs to meet.
Great question.
The accessibility, because that's something that I'm focused on as well, like how can we make systems more accessible. And so I think one thing that we often keep in mind, and Sue has mentioned this, Chirac has, at the moment we often talk about text-based systems, and the more we go forward, and Peter just said that now as well, like video, images, voice, like all of that becomes a lot more important, and that makes sure that people that may not have a particular skill of a particular language, may not be able to type, read, that they might also have access to information, and hopefully that helps with just general accessibility. Obviously, that doesn't take away, and that's what Chirag was saying as well, we still need to educate. It's not that, all right, we've got machines and we don't have to care about anything else. But it may level the playing field somehow, somewhat. And so I've got great hopes that we can use this technology potentially for very good things. And obviously, there's always a flip side to it, as you already mentioned, about the children maybe accessing things that they shouldn't be accessing. However, there's quite a bit of research around how children use information and how they search. Like, it's interesting to see that children can now, you know, say something to a Google Home device or an Alexa, and it actually replies back, and their queries are different. So for every, I think, you know, for every kind of device that we have, we will also see different kind of needs that come to play, and so we will see different kind of tasks that emerge from accessing these different devices. And I think that that's really exciting to see. Okay, we always think about, okay, text and very narrow queries, but what else is out there? So I'm positive on this one.
Can I just make an observation about that as well? That I think what we see from other technologies that are trying to deal with sort of small user groups, or people that have very sort of specific needs that might not be able to be met profitably by a corporation because the market's not big enough, is that this is where user innovation kicks in. And often, you see this in a lot of areas where it's often small groups of users that have, very, particularly around medical sort of devices and so on, where people that really want this thing for their children or for their family, and often engineers, they'll put in the effort, they'll make it themselves, they'll often break a few laws in the process of doing that, solve the problem and go, look, I just did it, here's some code if anyone else wants to do it. And that sort of user innovation sort of goes through. But what also happens there is that the companies sort of watch that and go, oh, okay, A, it can be done, B, there's a market there, and will then follow that up. So I think we often have to rely on the community itself to sort of lead that process, just to prove that things can be done, that the tech is there. But this goes back to the search capability. Is a massively enhanced search capability massively enhances user innovators. A downstream benefit is eventually we might get commercial products, maybe, but problems are being solved initially. So I think there's again, the reason to be optimistic about using the technology to solve a lot of these problems itself.
I just wanted to comment. Johanne spoke about different modalities of information access and using these for supporting diverse needs. To me, what one thing that excites about generative AI is that suddenly you don't need to rely anymore on an information source that's been written for a target audience in mind. Say oh, this is quick sort for 5 years old, right? You can actually get the technology to generate a text that can be readable to a 5 years old, right? And that's quite empowering. And so you can broaden information delivery to different cognitive and literacy levels, right?
Cool. One last question.
Yeah, sorry. I think I'm more of a pessimist and an optimist than Peter is. I think 50 years from now, I'm still waiting for my flying car. I'm old enough to believe that's true. And 50 years from now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think search is not going to be as different as we want it to be, and Google probably will still be around because of brand. Brand means something, and like it might not be the same as it is now, but it'll be different. The one thing that I didn't hear a little bit talked about, like I'm not talking like a humanoid robot that follows me around. That's a bit creepy. But like so a virtual PA, Like I think sort of having an agent that you can delegate responsibility to would actually bypass some of the problems with data silos, where you could give them access to these things and they could help. And it's not really zero shot, which I'm not sure I believe in, because I think people are incredibly unpredictable, but it can actually do work for you, right? So like now we don't really have that capability, and I think 50 years from now it seems plausible, and I think it would be something that I would really love to have. Do you have comments on that?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. And yeah, I actually agree with you. I'm pretty sure Google will be around in 2052 from brand and just the sheer billions in the bank. They don't have to do anything, and they could, still be a company in 25 years without any trouble just turning off search today. On the PA front, I think it's really interesting. Like large tech companies have been trying pretty hard now for the last decade on this. There are a bunch of scenarios. If we go back to like the Steve Jobs, I don't know if you've seen the personal assistant video from Steve Jobs and Apple. It's an amazing video to watch if you haven't seen it, because that dates back to, I think, late 80s, early 90s. And it's a cracker, and you go like, wow, that looks so compelling. I'd love to have something like this. And we still don't have it. It'd be really easy if we had tech that really understood language. And GPT is a sort of an interesting facsimile of something that purports to understand how to produce language in response to language prompts. And increasingly there are like lots of low code, no code approaches to kind of connecting things up. So I think it is feasible that people will build that. Now the question for me is, are there a set of sufficiently common activities that many people want sufficient to go like, cool, we're actually going to build this in a really nice designed interface? Because for me, this is still the kind of tension with all of this stuff, is that, yeah, low code, no code, but it's still a bit of code, and there's still a bit of computing. And how do you put something together that is so simple to use, where you just literally go like, yeah, could you go and do this? And it has enough world understanding, it knows enough about you, you've privileged it enough, and you haven't had to do like painful amounts of stuff, like, book your travel to blah. Like that's a classic personal assistant scenario. But it turns out it's a little bit harder, and you've got to be trusting that it's actually spending, did you want it to buy a business class ticket for you at $10,000, or was that a bit too much? So yeah, I think really interesting, and I think we'll see a lot of innovation in this space in the next 5 years with the opening up of LLM technology and the connecting up to pluggable APIs on services.
And what I love about that example is it just reinforces how complex human beings are, right? That it's not as simple as you say of, I want to go to this city, book me a ticket, because we are strange, complex beasts where we go, oh, no, I'm not going through San Francisco. I hate that city. It's not, and you've then got to really train it at a very personalized level. So I think of even the assistants that I've worked with in my job who are human beings and get to know me. It takes a long time for them to understand that, no, she cannot have a meeting on X day at X time because reasons, right? And it's how long would it take to train something? Possibly my whole life, but I feel like that's how long it's taken me to train myself on what I want. On this note, I think it's a perfect time to end.